obviously I have one, and it is quite a good read. Ambassador Hill is also a frequent columnist for the Project Syndicate. He's a former Korea ambassador. His last post was ambassador to Iraq, April 2009 till August 2010. Prior to Iraq, Ambassador Hill served as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2005 to 2009, in which he was also the head of the delegation for the six-party talks on the North Korea nuclear issue. Earlier on, he was U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Ambassador to the Republic of Macedonia, and Special Envoy to Kosovo. I also would like to alert you that he is going to be a speaker via a remote webinar on January 7, 2021 for the Sarasota Institute of Lifelong Learning. The topic will be the President's Inbox, and as the new administration takes office, it will face challenges of redefining a U.S. changing role in the world. This will be an excellent follow-up presentation. You don't want to miss it. Sign up at silsarasota.org. Now, for today, the topic is Biden's cabinet selections and their impact on foreign policy and national security. And his presentation will focus on the following: that President Obama used to be referred to as No Drama Obama, based on Biden's competent first cabinet selections, all whom have worked closely together and congenially together in the past. It appears Biden will follow Obama's lead as he tries to reconnect the U.S. with the rest of the world. Okay, just briefly, so far, President-elect Biden has picked the following to be part of his new cabinet: Anthony Blinken for Secretary of State, Alejandro Mayorkas for Secretary of Homeland Security, Avril Haines for Director of National Intelligence, Jake Sullivan for National Security Advisor, and Linda Thomas Greenfield, another retired Foreign Service officer, to be the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. So, this already is generating some controversy. The New York Times characterizes this team as a repudiation of President Trump's isolationism, but they will have to resolve tensions between an Obama-era approach and the fresh thinking the president wants to address the changed world since the nominees in the Obama administration. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to Ambassador Hill for his presentation. All of the participants are urged to submit questions to Ambassador Hill via the chat button. And my colleague, my co-moderator, Bob Gary, will start off the questioning. Okay, over to you, Ambassador Hill.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I want to say what a pleasure it is to talk to the Longboat Club Key. I've been to Longboat, I guess, once out of Sarasota, then one other time when I almost ran aground there with my sailboat. Rather tough shoals around Longboat, but any Longboat Key. So anyway, pleasure to have this opportunity to talk. I'd like to put one caveat out there, which is I don't think anyone was more pleased than I was to see Joe Biden elected. I am a thorough supporter of Biden, and I think he's taking the party in the right direction. So I will make comments, of course, about his picks and what they may suggest about the future, but they need to be understood in the spirit that I'm actually very enthused about what Joe Biden wants to do. Of course, we're having this meeting in, to put it mildly, rather fraught times. A friend of mine in of all places, Macedonia, now called North Macedonia, sent me an email and said, your problem in the U.S. is you don't have an American embassy in Washington, because if you had an American embassy in Washington, they'd be putting out these statements to the effect that everyone needs to be calm and follow the constitutional principles and commit themselves to nonviolence. Yeah. So anyway, we are meeting, I think, at rather fraught times in the United States. But I think it's particularly a good thing that we're meeting this Tuesday morning, because yesterday we got I mean, not clarity for me or probably any of you, but for some people in the country, they finally realize that we have a transition underway and a new president coming in. So there is no question that people have high expectations that somehow this new administration will somehow take us back to where we were before we went on this excursion through Trump land. And so I think one of the first things for people to realize is there's no going back. It's a kind of a different world than it was 4 years ago, partly because of our own administration and the kind of alliances and, frankly, problems we've created with a lot of traditional allies. But I think it's just the fact that there are some countries out there that are not quite the same countries they were in 2016. I think one of the prime examples of this is China. China has always been a difficult interlocutor. My view always was to come down on the side of working hard to find patterns of cooperation with China, see what can be done, with the view that if you think it's hard to work with China, try working against China. And yet, I think in the last 4 years, we've seen a continually more assertive China. The Trump administration's approach was to say, if you can be more assertive, so can we. And I think that has really not found any equilibrium at this point. And so I think whether we can get back together with China in terms of a productive relationship, whatever we're going to try to do with China, it's going to be quite a challenge. And I don't think we can assume that we can just pick up where we left off. I say we, that is people who believe in engaging in the world. So it's going to be a lot of tremendous challenges going forward out there. And I thought one thing I could do is maybe go through some of these challenges. And then the second thing I want to do is, of course, take this new team, quite a different team from the one that's in office today, although it's middle of the day, so I don't know if anyone's resigned or been fired in the last few minutes. But indeed, I mean, it is one of the most volatile and kind of hard to predict cabinets we've ever had. We were talking earlier before we all got on whether the Secretary of State, who I am frankly not a big fan of, Mike Pompeo, can lay claim to the status of the worst Secretary of State. After all, he has really tough competition in the form of Rex Tillerson, who may have had, I think, more normal views of the world, but who nonetheless was looking at very much gutting the entire State Department by taking a proposal to have a 30% cut that White House and OMB had suggested he take, and he was dutifully implementing it at a time when his own congressional leaders, including the Republican-controlled Senate was saying, don't you dare think in terms of a 30% cut. But there he was going ahead with a 30% cut. And so I think there's frankly, given some of these individuals and how they've operated, there's no question this cabinet is going to be much as sort of closer to the norm of cabinets over recent administrations. And I speak as someone who's worked for 3 Democratic presidents, 3 Republican presidents. I've been confirmed by 3 presidents, Democrats and Republicans. So I don't do this in a partisan way, but I think probably history will show that the Trump administration has been, to be diplomatic about it, somewhat of an outlier here. So let me mention, we were just trying to catalog who we have in the new administration. And when you start disaggregating it in terms of the foreign affairs team, it's only a few names so far. So we're still pretty early on in the process. We have, of course, Tony Blinken, who's very well known to many people. He was, after all, the deputy secretary during the latter part of the Obama administration. He also has been very close to Joe Biden over the years, served on his in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with Biden, and has also worked with Biden at the NSC and in Biden's own foreign policy shop when Biden was vice president. So Tony, I think, is very well known to everybody. He's a very sort of user-friendly person. He's interested in what people have to say. He speaks with a much softer voice than many people perhaps are used to these days. But I would describe him as someone who is very much of an internationalist, very much wanting to engage in the world or re-engage in the world, and understands the point that usually in our sort of constellation of other actors out there, allies come first. I worked with him. We both had parts of the European portfolio back during the Clinton administration. We had adjoining offices in the old executive office building, and we shared a balcony, actually, which is a nice thing to have. I haven't had a balcony off of my office before or since. So we'd go out there and we'd watch press conferences in front of the West Wing. Yasser Arafat's press conference comes to mind. So I got to know Tony, and I think people who have the view that we need to engage with our partners and allies, we need to find solutions, I think would be very, very comfortable with this secretary designate for Joe Biden. I'll just finish the other names, and then we'll go back and start describing or discussing some of the challenges they all have. The other name, of course, is Avril Haines, who is going to be the DNI. This is an absolutely key position, which if there's been real damage done to various elements of the federal government. People often talk about the State Department, but they should also talk about the intelligence services that have been very harshly handled by the current president. And Avril comes out of that world and is very much a believer in the system. And I thought it was very interesting as she was introduced by the president-elect. She made very clear that her loyalty is she's extremely appreciative, obviously, but her loyalty is to the Constitution and her duties. So sort of a no-nonsense, but person who has a real deep sense of what America needs to do in the world in terms of reattaching itself. In the national security advisor, what you often look for is someone who combines a real strategic sense of the world, who understands issues from all over the world, who can go macro, that is 30,000 feet on those issues, but can also drill down to being at treetop levels and understanding what is going on in country X. And so it is quite a natural and excellent pick to have Jake Sullivan, who really, I think, has that kind of policy sense, combined with the fact that what you also need in a national security advisor is someone who's willing to put in those 20-hour days. And so you have an extremely hardworking person who is as bright as they come. And I sent him a congratulation, and I just said, you're made for that job. And I think that's very, very true. So he also, of course, has worked very closely with Tony and Avril, and so they know each other very well. I think the New York Times said this is less of a team of rivals as it is a team of buddies. That maybe they meant that slightly pejoratively, but if you are looking for teams of people who work well together, who listen to each other, who often meet each other halfway and are able to forge policies and make good proposals to the president, decision-making proposals for the president, I think you've got a tremendous team. Finally, the other name that has been that has been announced is our UN ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield. LTG, as she's called, is also a veteran Foreign Service officer, like Michael and me. She's been in the Foreign Service for about 33 years, 35 years, something on that order of magnitude. She's worked in many different countries, an Africa specialist, but someone with also with European backgrounds, and also a person who really understands that the job of the United States is not only to kind of spread the gospel of diplomacy and of democracy and things like that, but also to have the capacity to meet with anybody and to give them tough messages as needed. And so I think LTG is she's one of the most popular Foreign Service officers I know. She was the Director General in the Foreign Service. That is one tough job because people who come through the door of the Director General's office usually have a problem, and often they're not very nice problems you have to deal with in this human resource area. And she came out of that job with everyone still loving her. So I think you can really give her high marks to her diplomacy. She's been a senior person in policy terms. When I was the Assistant Secretary for Asia, she was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in Africa and was frequently in Condi Rice's senior staff meetings and always held her own in describing whatever wars and shoot-em-ups and coups that were going on in East Africa and other parts of that very complex continent. So I think for dealing with the member states of the UN, we've got a real winner there as well. So I think these are four very top-notch people, and including a fellow career Foreign Service officer, which we always like to see. And so the question is, well, how these people are going to combine, and what kind of foreign policy are we going to see looking ahead? Well, I think the first thing to kind of look at is what are the crises out there, and what are we going to need from our foreign policy team. I think we have an administration where the president himself is very familiar with a lot of issues. When I was ambassador in Iraq, and I wasn't there for too long, it was less than a year and a half, Joe Biden came there on the order of 5 or 6 times to visit Iraq. He was a really hands-on vice president. He was trying essentially to make sure that Iraq was handled at his level and that Barack Obama could focus on others. And so he understood the need that if you're going to be engaged on something, you better be engaged at really up close. So I think it's fair to say, however, that as he becomes president, and I think the agenda is quite clear to try to stitch together this very torn political fabric in this country, that he is going to have to allow his foreign policy team kind of a wide berth to address issues, even as he understands things. And frankly, given his experience and his capacity to turn enemies into friends, I think it's going to be difficult for him to turn this over to other people while he focuses on a truly colossal domestic agenda. So I think it's fair to say that, when you look at Tony Blinken, you're really going to be looking at some real leadership, looking for leadership, and I think you'll be looking at leadership in terms of what our foreign policy should be. To me, the issues, there's no secret. I don't have any surprise issues in the world, but I think, as I suggested earlier, I think our relationships with China, our relationship with China is absolutely key. There is no percentage in the U.S. in U.S. politics, whether you're Democrat or Republican, saying anything nice about China these days. There's a kind of almost it's the one thing that perhaps our political parties agree with, that China is a very difficult competitor. That said, I think if people can kind of stop and catch their breath a little about China, there's an understanding that it's been a relationship that for many decades has been characterized by a very strong sense of competition, but also a sense of cooperation. And not that there's a golden mean here, because I think we're going to get a lot more competition than cooperation that we had in the past. I think there does need to be an effort to have an engagement with China and to try to address issues, to try to lay out to the Chinese what our major issues are, things that we need to see happen if we can move forward with a closer relationship with China. In China, there's not a lot of interest in reciprocating a point of view like that. So I think my expectation is we're not going to see a lot of progress with China certainly in the coming couple of years. If we, however, can keep our voices down and they can keep their voices down, perhaps we can match up some issues ahead. And I think Tony and that team are very much are the right people to do that. It doesn't mean that we're going to kind of, you recall in the beginning of the Obama administration, there was a lot of loose talk about the G2, that somehow China and the U.S. were going to solve all these problems and then belatedly inform the rest of the world that we already have that taken care of. I don't think we're going to see much G2ism between the U.S. and China, but perhaps we can look for issues where we can both agree that something needs to be accomplished. I think with respect to the China relationship, there are a couple that come to mind. One is the issue of climate change. One of the arguments against the Paris Accords was that somehow China was not going to live up to anything that it has agreed to, and therefore why should we be in the Paris Climate Accords? Well, I don't think that's the right approach, and I think what the right approach is to see what we can come to an understanding about what China will do and what we can do when we're back in it. And I must say, to me, that is one of the predictions that I feel very much will come to pass. So I think we'll see some effort to work with the Chinese on climate. The second issue, I think we need to work with the Chinese. Frankly, we need to work with or without the Chinese, is the issue of North Korea. North Korea is continuing to develop a whole range of rocketry. They have moved over to solid fuel rockets, meaning that they can have the potential of a much more mobile and therefore survivable missile force. It's quite different from a liquid fuel rocket where you it takes a while to stand the thing up. It takes even longer to fill it up with fuel. And so it gives us a long time to look at something and determine whether it's a threat or not. Solid fuel rockets can be hidden in forests and stood up and fired off. So this is getting to be pretty serious stuff. The Chinese have clearly put a lot of heat on the North Koreans not to be testing. And the Chinese, I think, understand that if you test more long-range missiles, you really invite and some would argue you demand a U.S. response to this. So I think there will be a tendency to see whether we can sit down with the Chinese and come up with a kind of common approach to North Korea. There are those, of course, who argue that, well, China enjoys the North Korean nuclear program because somehow it infuriates the United States and ties us up in knots over North Korea while they're free to do other things. In fact, I don't think China wants to see a nuclear North Korea any more than we do, but they also don't want to see a North Korea that's somehow destabilized by all this. They don't want to see a North Korea that collapses and is somehow taken over by South Korea. as a successor state. Frankly, we could live with that if it could be done in a way that doesn't involve a war. We could certainly live with that. But I think for the Chinese, it's more complex. Of course, they don't want North Korean refugees, but frankly, nor do they want a situation where it's seen in China that somehow the U.S. has prevailed in the Korean Peninsula and the Chinese have failed. So there's a lot of issues of national pride, and it goes to some of their own bouts with nationalism that they're dealing with now. So I think it is much more, it is important for us to sound them out and see what we can do to kind of keep the North Koreans from making any progress. And something that I feel very strongly, we need to make it clear that we don't accept a nuclear North Korea, and that sooner or later they need to understand that we will not accept nuclear weapons in the hands of a North Korea. So those are kind of two issues that need to be addressed with China that may actually help deal with China. And while I can't predict with any certainty where Tony will want to go on this, I would predict a more useful dialogue with the Chinese that could have the effect of modifying their behavior. Now, just to contrast this, Secretary Pompeo went to China back in October 2018, and as he walked in, the Vice President Pence had given a speech at the Hudson Institute in which he kind of laid out a whole Cold War with China. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi thought that was a good occasion to lecture Pompeo in front of the television cameras while shaking his hand. And Pompeo didn't really appreciate it, and frankly, it was not in good manners by the Chinese foreign minister. But the consequence was that Pompeo never went back. And so we've now got 2 years and counting where the U.S. Secretary of State has not even visited China. I think we need a better dialogue, and judging from what we can see about Tony Blinken, while there's an understanding that China relationship isn't going to get fixed in a big hurry, it does suggest that we'll want to see what is possible through dialogue and see if the issues can be calmed down there. I think another area which may perhaps should not be described as a crisis, but I would go ahead and use that term, and that is how we're managing our NATO allies. The NATO allies have not appreciated the way they've been treated. I think there's a hopefulness that somehow the Biden cavalry will run to the rescue or ride to the rescue. That said, I think President Trump, by a sort of singular marketing of issues of how much money are the Europeans paying to their own defense, and therefore are they paying to the common defense, that I think there are a lot of expectations in the U.S. that the Europeans need to pay more. And so I don't think some of these issues will go away, but I think the tone will be quite changed, and I think the willingness to work with the Europeans will be changed. And I think that's where we'll see a change, and we'll see. I'm not in a position to predict where Joe Biden will make his first trip, but I would not be surprised if it's a reversion to making your first trip abroad, in addition to our neighbors, to making it to traditional allies. So the point about Europe I was about to make is Europe is having problems with what are called illiberal democracies, notably Hungary and Poland. I don't think, I could be wrong, but I really don't think we're going to see a big effort coming from the U.S. side to deal with that. I think Poland, as illiberal as it's been, has done pretty well with the Trump administration. I think a lot of Polish American voters feel that way. And I don't think a new administration will want to kind of take Poland and Hungary to task over these issues. So it may not be terribly inspiring for those of us who would like to make clear to the Poles and the Hungarians that they have to act like other European states. But I think overall, the U.S. will probably leave that task to the Europeans. So that said, I think there will be a lot of effort to make sure our relations are with the Europeans are overall going well. I think there is a clear understanding of the threat that the problematic nature of the Putin regime, both to Europe and the U.S. And I think there will be far less of the kind of mixed messages. I don't think there will be mixed messages from this incoming administration with respect to how do you deal with Russia. I think in the Middle East, and I think there will be some effort to see whether we can kind of find common language with the Sunni Arab states on issues such as Syria, and whether, frankly speaking, the Russians may be wearing out their welcome in Syria. And so I think you'll see a much more engaged and ultimately, I think, a more diplomatically focused effort by this administration to deal with the complexities of these issues. And of course, that comes into front and center with the question of how to handle Iran. No question, the people in the Biden administration or the incoming Biden administration feel that the best way to deal with Iran's nuclear programs was to have an agreement. That is the agreement that was reached So I think we will see a reconnection on JCPOA, but we might also see some effort to deal with why we don't have an agreement or why we did pull out of the JCPOA. And that might include issues such as whether there can be a plus factor, whether there can be some effort to deal with Iran's sort of regional mischief, whether there could be a sort of JCPOA plus something that didn't exist in the original one. You recall as the Obama administration was negotiating this issue, it was there was an interest in taking on Iranian mischief in the region and whether we could put some restraints on what Iran was doing. But that said, I think there was a concern that they didn't want to open up a JCPOA that was really dealing with issues of nuclear weapons to becoming a sort of Middle East conference with the Saudis insisting on being in the meeting room. And so I think there has to be a kind of relook at how to handle all this, because ultimately I think there has to be some effort to work with the U.S. Senate and some greater to make sure that things don't fall apart. Because if the U.S. Cannot reach agreements between in foreign affairs and only does them on the basis of executive agreements, and that everything we enter into is then avoided by the incoming administration, that has tremendous long-term repercussions. And I'm sure people will be looking very, very hard at that. The other point, and at that point I will stop so we can turn this into a much more interactive format, is this is an administration who I think really does believe, the incoming administration really does believe in the problems of the global South, and that we need to be a part of that solution. And I think the global South is often kind of left out in these sort of broad brush strokes of what an administration's foreign policy is going to look like. But I think with LTG with Linda Thomas Greenfield at the UN, I think there will be a greater effort to deal with some of the complexities and the difficulties of Africa in a way that hasn't been dealt with. One other area I should mention, though, is I do believe that we're going to see an an effort in East Asia to kind of work with other partners and to do a better job of bringing some of our partners together. And namely, I'm talking about South Koreans and the Japanese who've been at loggerheads for some years. So perhaps this is more of a hope over an expectation, but I think we need to look at some of these problems in the world, not just as problems arising from into our bilateral relationships, but rather problems arising from the complexity of drawing up multilateral structures. So I would like to see, in addition to the idea that we can kind of create an Indo-Pacific region, this is an idea that even predates the Trump administration. I think we also need to make sure that our partners and allies in East Asia are able to work better together. It's not a question of encircling China, and I think we need to make that point clear, but it is a question of making sure that our values and our interests are better supported by good relations with allies and partners, and in turn that those allies and partners have good relations themselves. So certainly a tall order, but I do believe that we have the right people to go after some of these issues, and I do expect that we will see 4 years from now a very different international landscape.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ambassador Hill. This has been very illuminating to take a tour around the world, and perhaps in your comments you can speak just a little bit, maybe not right now, about Latin America. This is another area that has some issues. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Bob Gary, to get going on the questions. Bob?
President Trump has continued to falsely promote that the election was rigged. How does this lie impact the U.S. internationally and our soft power?
I don't think there's any question that this is one of the worst elements of what President Trump has been doing since the election is in our foreign policy. I don't think we're going to. This does not serve our reputation well, and it certainly undermines our status as a sort of vicar of democracy. So I think we are going to have to fix these internal problems. Now, as we all know, they go beyond just President Trump and the fact that he's obviously a sore loser. It goes to a whole part of America that feels very disaffected from our institutions that have been around now centuries. So I think from what we all can tell, we have a president very much dedicated to the task of trying to bring us together. And I think that's going to be extremely important. I might add that part of Trumpism has been this American firstism, which is really, as many people have said, is American aloneism. And he's left us kind of isolated. And so I think this also needs to be taken up. We had a problem of neoconservatives who felt that the only way to deal with a country was to threaten bombing on them. We had a problem, frankly, with liberal interventionism, also a very aggressive policy where the military was put to use toward our broader goals. And I think the result of all that has been a certain amount of isolationism from the left with the view that somehow we're too bad for the world, from the right with the view that we're somehow too good for the world. And I think we need to be able to handle that, deal with that. And I think that question, and the one that you started by asking, really goes to how can we deal with our political system and take some of the polarization out of it.
And it was asked that you see an issue with a former general being picked as the Secretary of Defense. And as a follow-up to that, are you concerned that the U.S. is vulnerable to picking another wannabe strongman and reverting to an authoritarian government? And how does the military factor into all that?
Well, the first question of, Lloyd Austin, of course, was a uniformed officer, four-star general. He came to Iraq about the time I left Iraq, so we had a chance to meet. Of course, we didn't have a chance to work together. I think the world of him based on his reputation and based on his sort of approach to issues. But obviously, we do have, by law, provisions that make or offer us another hurdle to having a uniformed military or former uniformed person come into the government as a civilian. So I respect people's concerns about that, but I think we also have waivers for dealing with it. And so I see the concern because it was done during Mattis, and now we would be doing it just 4 years later, having another waiver. And the purpose of a waiver, of course, is not to be automatic. I'm not sure I personally would make a stand right now. If sometime in the future this becomes a regular thing, and I don't consider two dots necessarily to be the basis of a strong line on this, but I think if we saw more of this in the future, that would be a better time to make a stand about it. I think he's an extremely able person who will absolutely do a tremendous job in terms of the what needs to be done in the Pentagon, and no one knows it better than he does. There are obviously some very quality people as well who were finalists for that position, and I hope that those people will also be put to use in various forms. I think we're in a situation of all hands on deck.
Okay, Ambassador Hill, one of our questions is coming here, and what are your thoughts about the criticism that's out there about Biden's cabinet not being diverse enough?
Well, I understand this was a very ethnically diverse coalition that came together in the Democratic Party. I understand that there are groups out there whose purpose is really to try to get one of their own into positions. I understand the dynamics of it, but I hope people will understand that the president-elect understands these things too, and what he's trying to do is put together the best cabinet he can put together, because the United States is enormously challenged internally and externally. And so I hope people will cut the president-elect some slack on doing this. He clearly has a goodwill toward this issue, but I think people need to understand that we are in quite a mess in the world right now, and I think we ought to give the president-elect some latitude in how he addresses these issues and who he addresses them with.
I have a three China questions I'm going to wrap into one. How do you think the Biden administration will handle the China crackdown, deal with Taiwan, and do you believe the Biden administration will roll back the tariffs?
I think, Bob, you meant Hong Kong.
Isn't that what I said? Hong Kong?
No, you didn't. Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's one where I have no doubt the president is talking with various close economic advisors on, especially the issue of the tariffs. I suspect you're not going to see any broad brush policy that looks like he's backing down on China. I don't think that would be in the president's interest, and frankly, I don't think it's in the country's interest. So I think the issue is, how do you resolve these problems? Sometimes the best way to resolve them is to make them bigger and try to go after issues that are not even on the table. Other times you just kind of focus on one thing, tariffs. I'm not sure just focusing on tariffs is going to lead to a better outcome, but nor do I. That is, I don't see the president-elect just trying to undo the things that Trump has has done, even though one could argue whether they were really effective or not. I think it's going to require a broader brush, so with various questions thrown into the mix. Anyone who says it's easy to resolve Hong Kong doesn't really understand the problems of Hong Kong and the problems of Chinese attitudes to Hong Kong. It's not an easy problem. As a general rule, I think it's important for U.S. to be on the side of human rights. I don't think you go too far wrong when you're on that side. But that said, I think we need to spend a lot of time understanding this and seeing if in the context of a policy we can come out with something where people feel that we've made progress. And so I don't think there's going to be some reversal of the sanctions, of the tariffs rather. I don't think there's going to be any sort of 100% metaphysical clarity about how we want to see Hong Kong dealt with. And by the way, Taiwan is also a problem because there is a growing sort of independent identity in Taiwan. This is not an easy issue. But I think it does speak to the need to have serious conversations with the Chinese and not just lists of problems where we want to go and solve each problem. I think the solution will come out of a broader approach. It's not easy. I mean, we can't just kind of do these things on the basis of a long list saying Uyghurs, you're bad, Hong Kong, you're bad, Taiwan, you're bad, and expect much of a batting average out of that stuff. So I think we need to rebuild the relationship in the context of which maybe we can make progress on these issues. But it's going to require a really deft approach, and it's not going to be what many Americans look for in this and other issues, any quick fixes. There's no, in China policy, there's no refuge for those in need of instant gratification. It's going to take some real tact and subtlety in getting a situation where there's a perception that things are better while we deal with some of these very tough issues like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Uyghurs, and other issues that the Chinese are convinced are those only to deal with.
I mean, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I wanted to give you a question, Ambassador Hill, for something that's near and dear to both our hearts. The State Department, where you and I called home for our professional careers, has reeled under 4 years of Trump, from the debacle of Tillertson's botched reorganization to Mike Pompeo's total disregard for the career service, questionable ethics, and hosting multiple events. What is the damage that you believe Tony Blinken will need to fix to restore morale and the standing of the career foreign service in the conduct of American diplomacy?
Well, as career foreign service, I like to see more foreign service officers in key positions. I want some restoration of the percentage that career foreign service officers have had in ambassadorships and just responsibilities. When I was Assistant Secretary for East Asia during the Condi Rice State Department, which after all was a Republican administration, I like the fact that just about all of the regional assistant secretaries were career. I mean, after all, you're a regional assistant secretary. To get that job, you've probably done every other job in the department. And it's the regional assistant secretaries who task the embassies. No one else tasks an embassy to do something. And I just think it was a very good idea to have people who know what embassies do. And during the Trump administration, it's just very, very few regional people have been involved, or career people have been involved in this, and those who are have the sort of scarlet letter of acting, emblazoned on their chest that somehow they're only acting. So I think there needs to be some thought it's my fervent expectation that there will be this thought about how to make sure that when you're a career foreign service officer, you're really going to have to step up and deal with tough issues. When you give people responsibility, they tend to perform better than when you don't give them responsibility. I mean, I used to have speechwriters, for example, and if I never used a speechwriter produced, I would get pretty bad speeches because the person never expected that speech was going to be put to use. If you made it clear, hey, I'm going to use this, do your best, you would get the best speeches. So I think the Foreign Service needs to have the sense that they're in the hot seat, and the Foreign Service needs to have the sense that we're going to manage these things, and then I think you'll get your best production. And I like to think that this incoming administration understands that, notwithstanding that there are lots of people who come out of the think tank world who'd like to be back in the State Department. I think I think we need more career experience there. I mean, I worked for Dick Holbrook, and his favorite epithet with me was, "Oh, you're a typical Foreign Service officer." I finally pushed back. I said, "What's wrong with that, Dick? I mean, that's, you can do a lot worse." So I think we need more of that, and my hope is that will be the way to address it. I know it's a much better cafeteria than it used to be and all of that, and you can, get fresh-made cookies and stuff, but I don't care about that kind of stuff. I want to see Foreign Service officers put in tough positions and made to perform, and it's my hope that will come to pass.
Thank you very much. I agree wholeheartedly. Bob, you had a question?
Yes. Ambassador, you were a former lead negotiator with North Korea. And do you think that President Trump's one-on-one interface with Kim Jong-un has changed for better or worse the U.S.-North Korea dynamic? Yeah,
he got involved with North Korea, frankly, after making it a lot worse, of course, in the fall of 2017. But he got involved directly after, frankly, there's very little high-level attention in North Korea. I'm not saying there wasn't any during the Obama administration. They certainly had special envoys. They certainly had discussions with the North Koreans. They had discussions with the Chinese. But I think, generally speaking, by the time we got to 2018, there was a sense that not much had gone on and not much was going in the right direction. So, when President Trump said he wanted to meet Kim Jong-un, I mean, as a professional career, as a career Foreign Service officer who had negotiated with him, one part of me said, "Oh, this is not a good idea. This is not going to get us anywhere." But then another part of me said, "Well, what's wrong with having the president try to restart the thing and make it clear that this is a top priority, make it clear to the North Koreans that we've got to get this thing done." The problem was, so I tried to go with that, but the problem was the president just won't do any homework. I mean, when he looks at a briefing book, he thinks it's a doorstop or something. They are rather enormous things. He won't read. He won't listen. He would only go on his instincts. So the consequence of all this is he meets the North Koreans, is totally ill-prepared for the meeting, and by the second day, the only thing seemed to have happened is he started speaking some North Korean, because instead of referring to joint exercises with the South Koreans that the North Koreans are always trying to torpedo, so to speak, instead of referring to joint exercises, he would refer instead to hostile war games with South Korea. So clearly, the first time he had heard about this, or thought he had heard about it, was when Kim Jong-un complained about these exercises, whereupon he went about canceling or postponing these exercises. To me, when you give little gifts to the North Koreans like that, it's not taken as a sign of goodwill. It's taken as a sign of weakness. So I think the sum total of these negotiations was pretty abysmal. And so my hope is that they will be put back into a much more serious vein. Now, how you do that, I'm not, as someone who spent 4 years at it, I can tell you it's not easy, but you certainly need to, when you have a high-level meeting, you should have a very clear understanding of what you've got in a joint communique. You want the joint communique to be the outcome of the meeting. It was as if President Trump just wanted to do it all on his own. So you need to have any kind of high-level engagement preceded by, I won't call it worker level, but preceded by staff level engagement. So I am probably in a minority these days, but I believe that we can make progress with North Korea. I do not accept the idea that they need nuclear weapons for their, as a sort of existential issue, that if they don't have nuclear weapons, they'll fail as a state. I don't accept that. I think they want nuclear weapons to scare us off the Korean Peninsula. And I think we need to make very clear that we're not going to leave, and we're going to work closely with the South Koreans. The North Koreans often exploited our differences with the South Koreans, and they'll continue to do that. But I think we can create a circumstance where the North Koreans could see a future without nuclear weapons as being a better future than with nuclear weapons. And so in terms of what President Trump did with them, I don't think it was terribly effective, and I hope it won't be repeated.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to switch to Latin America and the Caribbean. I mean, I could say off the top of my head, the huge issues with Central America, Honduras, drugs, refugees, immigration, the list goes on and on just for that part of the world. Then we have Venezuela. Clearly, it's a failed state, but it's hanging on by its fingernails. You've got the pandemic raging in Brazil and Argentina. There's no shortage of things, and yet it seems to be, in many respects, sort of the forgotten region. And I would like to see you hear your comments on that.
I think you have a point. It has been forgotten, and to the extent people remember it or think about it, they often think sort of ideologically about it. And I think it's we need, first of all, to understand the complexity of the region. And I know our Latin American people do understand that, but not every political appointee has understood the complexity of it. Secondly, I think any commitment to democratization there and to a values agenda, and I think that has to be part of it, because when we don't have that, we look pretty hypocritical. So I think any commitment to that needs to be combined with a commitment to economic relations that mean something. I think the immigration problem, it can't just be handled at the point of entry. It has to be handled in a sort of layered approach. Why are these people coming, risking their lives? What can be done in those countries to make those lives better? What can be done to work with various states that are not contiguous to us? I would kind of turn it over to expertise with the understanding that, this is probably a part of the world that means the most to our economy and means the most to our sort of social fabric, and try to deal with it in a much more nuanced way. I have not worked on Latin America. I have deep respect for those people who have, and what I worry about is it easily becomes political, like the issues of Cuba have turned into sort of an issue where you have just a political or ideological perspective on it, whereas I would like to see a perspective that obviously is guided by our values, but ultimately the destination is determined by the facts and what we can do. So I don't know to what extent the administration will focus on this, but I suspect that if I'm if I'm in dealing with immigration, that's number one and number 1 through 10 in terms of how to focus on it. And I would hope there would be a State Department with a capacity to deal with it. People always say, oh, the State Department's too big. We should be cutting it way down to what other countries have in their equivalents in their foreign ministries or foreign offices. Well, frankly, I think these issues are complex, and I think we need more resources, much more resources dedicated to these questions, because whether we like it or not, we're still kind of it in the world. And frankly, paying for staff in the State Department and paying for some foreign assistance, which is still a tiny fraction of any kind of defense expenditure, I think is the way to go. So I hope we will do a lot more on Latin America, and I just hope the people we get involved in it are some of our professionals who really understand the sort of, the antecedents of current crises, as well as the histories of these countries.
Okay, great. Bob, what do you think about wrapping this up with maybe a couple more questions?
I'd like to ask this. Ambassador, you have served in some of the most dangerous diplomatic posts in the world. And I know you wrote about these posts in your book, Outpost. You served on the front lines in the Balkans, the breakup of Yugoslavia, one-on-one meetings with Milosevic. You've been to Bosnia and Kosovo, the Dayton Conference. Can you share what it is like to deal with some of the world's most reviled leaders? And do you see any common qualities in these kinds of men?
Yeah, I remember I was with Holbrooke, and we were seeing Milosevic up in his weekend palace up in the Vojvodina. And the issue was ending the NATO bombing in Bosnia. By the way, we're starting to bomb rubble because we had bombed everything of any military value. And Milosevic told Holbrooke, "Look, I can't solve it. You need to deal with the Bosnian Serb President Karadzic and the Bosnian Serb General Mladic." Both of whom, by the way, were subsequently indicted as war criminals, and they're both in jail cells in The Hague today. So there is some justice in the world. So I remember Holbrooke turns to me and goes, he said to Milosevic, "Well, where are they?" And Milosevic said, "Oh, they're over in a villa about 200 meters from here." And I thought, oh my God, we've come here to Fruška Gora, to Vojvodina, and now we're going to sit down with a couple of, we knew they were going to be war criminals. And I remember Holbrooke turned to me and said, "Should I shake their hands?" And I said, and I just blurted out, shake their hand. Let's just get on with this and get it done. And I think, to me, you've got to, when you go into these meetings, you've got to be singularly focused on what it is you're trying to get done. And, there are times when you don't want to, no one would want to deal with Mladic, but he's what stands between you and what you're trying to get done, which in this case was lifting the siege of Sarajevo and making sure there was going to be heating fuel there for the first time in 5 years. And this was getting to the end of September. So I just felt it was important to just kind of be focused on what you're trying to do, and let the other stuff not stop you from doing what you have to do. Now, later on, I had this thing where I was supposed to meet the North Koreans, but I could only meet them if the Chinese were there, and if the Chinese, so the Chinese didn't show up, and what was I supposed to do? And I said, heck with it. If they want to fire me, they can fire me, but I know what I need to get done. And frankly, I don't need Chinese chaperones. So I met with them anyway. And I got a lot of flack for that. But I really think to some extent, when you send a negotiator out, you need to say, this is how we accomplish this. This is what we need. And if there's some red lines, which I don't think our country has very good experiences with the term red lines, but if there's some red lines, fine. Call them red lines and say under penalty of death, you won't cross that red line if you really want to say that. But I think if you're sending out a negotiator, you want the negotiator to get it done, get her done. And so I feel a large part of this is you need to have political people, whether it's the Secretary of State or the President, says, look, I'll take the heat, you just get it done. And so that is my kind of approach to it. It doesn't work all the time, and there are limits to it. I wouldn't want to sit there smoking a cigar with Ratko Mladic. So there are limits to this, obviously, but you've got to get the thing done. And I when I think of our kind of national psyche, it's of people who get stuff done. It's not of the nanny brigade, shaking our finger at everybody and complaining about everybody. It's of getting stuff done. And that kind of American ingenuity, practicality, I'd like to see us think of ourselves in those terms rather than in these kind of grotesque ideological terms that our country is more and more tending to go for.
Okay, great. I had flashbacks of memories in negotiating with the Chinese on property. And of course, you have to understand your adversary and what they want as well as a key negotiating principle. Okay, I'm going to ask you one final question, switching back to the Middle East. Iran's role in destroying Lebanon using Hezbollah is more than, mischief. The country's falling apart. What can be done to get the country back on track without Hezbollah in control?
Yeah. It is more than mischief. It's been it's really helped destroy Lebanon. But all right, the question is, how do you do that? I think I don't think the Iranians with this concept, weirdly, they have this concept kind of similar to us of forward defense. They like overseas bases the way we do. And so they're always kind of playing in these places that, frankly, we don't want them there. And I think this speaks to the need to get these regional conflicts on the table. And why is Iran so wedded to Hezbollah? A lot of reasons. It's more complex than most Americans think. If you go back to Iran and the turn of the 16th century, 1503, 1504, you see an Iran that was Sunni, and the Iranians turned to Shia because they wanted to differentiate themselves from the incoming Ottoman Turks who were Sunni and didn't want a situation where the Ottoman Turks would essentially eviscerate cultural differences. So the Shah Ismail at the time made Iran, just converted everyone to Shiism. And they did it with Shia clerics from southern Lebanon. So there's an old tie there. And I think if you ask some Iranian engineer about 1503 or whatever, he wouldn't know what you're talking about. But I think a lot of Iranian mullahs think that way. And it's not a question of being guided by this stuff, but it's a question of knowing about it. I've been in plenty of taxis in the Balkans and getting a history lesson, which wasn't necessarily what the president in question in the Balkans wanted, but you have to understand this stuff. So I guess we need to understand it better. But I think in terms of what Iran has done with these non-state, groups, we've got to deal with it. And I think if we dealt with it and had that on the table, we could probably deal with a lot of, we'd probably have a better batting average. And by the way, in Major League Baseball, you bat 300, you're doing very well. In the Middle East, you bat 220 and you're doing really well. So I'm I'm not claiming that this is easy, that you'll get to that point where the Iranian will hit the side of his head with the palm of his hand, say thank you, we'll pull out of Lebanon immediately. But I think we need to understand what it is and understand what how we go about it and how we assess our priorities. Of all the reasons to do things, reasons to go toe-to-toe with Iran, I don't think mirroring Saudi foreign policy is necessarily the right approach. I think we need to have our own policy on these things. Obviously, we don't want to do things that contradict what the Saudis are, for all their problems, they've been an ally over the years. But I think we need to be careful about just accepting someone else's view about these issues and try to have I'm talking diplomatically here, but try to have an independent foreign policy, which takes care of allies to be sure, but isn't necessarily informed by every prejudice those allies have. So it's a complex question, and it starts with people who know stuff and can think through stuff.
Okay, that's wonderful. I think we're going to bring this to a close. I just think you did a great job in giving us a tour around the world and a look forward. I think we are in for some exciting times ahead, hopefully with a better definition of the word excitement for the new Biden administration. And just on that note, one of our participants just sent me a chat that she already bought your audiobook.
Oh, thank you very much.
So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to our president, Ed Sable, to close it out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That truly was incredibly informative, and it sort of describes what we are, the Longbow Key Democratic Club. The club gives thoughtful people the opportunity to come together and learn and share thoughts and develop deeper understandings. And it really plays a valuable role here on Longbow Key. And it's folks like you, speakers like you, that give life to that, breath to that. I'd also like to thank the committee, Michael, Bob, Howard, Lucy, Becky, for putting these programs together. It takes a lot of work, a lot of preparation, a lot of thought, and we are all very grateful for your having done that. I would like to strongly, just to tell you a little bit more about the club. So in addition to providing a place of fellowship, having the Longbow Key Democratic Club enables us to aggregate our resources and work with the Democratic parties in Sarasota and Manatee counties to help increase involvement, voter turnout, things like that. So that's another positive function that we serve. And so I would very strongly encourage all of you to go to lbkdems.com, go to our website, sign up your membership. If you're in a position you can donate extra, please do that. It costs money to put these on. And we're going to be doing these virtual meetings for some period of time before we're going to be able to get back together again and do, formal luncheons that folks have to pay for. And then the final thing is that, we all know Georgia is going on. If you are on Arlene Skversky's email list, you got a link to where you could sign up to make phone calls, help out in the Georgia Senate race. I would encourage you to do that. If you don't have that link, again, go to our website, drop us a line, and we will connect you with folks who are going to make a difference in Georgia. So thank you very much again, Ambassador. Thank you, the committee. And yes.
Thank you. Real pleasure. All right, I'll sign off. Thank you very much.